After I transmigrated into a novel, I dated a good-looking extra and had a daughter with him. It wasn't until 3 years later that a system activated, telling me I was the villainous supporting female lead and had to return to the main storyline. Left with no choice, I lied and said I had a terminal illness. I left a letter behind, then disappeared without a trace. After that, I moved to a new city and dutifully played the part of the male lead's devoted admirer. After fawning over him for so long, the male lead finally agreed to take me to meet his parents. But when I pushed the door open, I saw the extra I'd abandoned sitting inside, holding a little girl in his arms. His eyes were glazed over, and he stared blankly in my direction. The male lead whispered to me, "Oh, right, my sister-in-law passed away not long ago. My brother cried so hard, he went blind. This widower's completely unhinged now. Better stay out of his way." My mind went blank for a second after the male lead said that. How could the random extra I dated be the male lead's brother? The system shrieked in my head when it heard my question. What? The extra you got together with back then was Kale Paulson? I nodded grimly. The system panicked. You've completely messed everything up. He's no extra. He's the biggest villain in this novel. No way. You absolutely cannot let Kale find out who you are right now, or everything will go completely off the rails. You're an innocent, naive girl in the male lead's eyes. Don't let him discover you were with his brother. As I listened, my gaze drifted involuntarily to the child in Kale's arms. The little girl was barely 2 years old, with rosy cheeks and clearly well taken care of. The only thing was, she had the exact same cold expression as her father. When I looked at her, she blinked at me curiously too. Just then, the male lead, Ian Paulson, took my hand and announced cheerfully, "Kale, I brought my girlfriend, Scarlett Kingsley." Kale's dim eyes flickered at the name. I remembered I'd used my real name from before transmigration when I was with Kale. Scarlett Clark. Different last name, he shouldn't recognize me, right? Ian noticed my silence and tugged my arm. "Say hello. This is my brother, Kale." In a panic, the system quickly altered my voice. It sounded normal to everyone else, but Kale couldn't hear my real tone. I breathed a sigh of relief and greeted him. "Hello, Kale." Hearing this unfamiliar voice, Kale finally looked away and gave a cold, detached After greeting each other, we all took our seats. Kale happened to sit right across from me. I decided the less I spoke, the fewer mistakes I'd make. I sat quietly in my seat, trying to stay out of sight. But Ian turned to me and said, "You're allergic to peanuts. Don't eat this dessert." His voice wasn't loud, but it carried clearly to Kale across the table. Ian put on gloves, picked up a plate of shrimp, and started peeling them. "You love shrimp, don't you? Let me get you some extra." Allergic to peanuts. Loved shrimp. I told Kale these same preferences and restrictions. His cutlery slowed to a stop. He stared at me unblinkingly with empty gray eyes. I knew he was blind and couldn't see my face at all, but his gaze still made my scalp prickle with unease. On edge and panicking, all I could wish for was that Ian would say a little less. But Ian scanned the table, spotted my favorite buffalo wings, and was about to speak again. Flustered, I dropped my innocent act and kicked him under the table. But Ian didn't seem to notice and still reached for the wings. Panicked, I kicked him 2 more times. Before I could finish moving, Kale, silent the whole meal, finally spoke. His gaze was vacant and unfocused, but his voice was calm. "Miss Kingsley, you're kicking me." Ian's attention shifted, and he stopped trying to serve me wings. He looked over at us. I never imagined I'd kicked the wrong person. I closed my eyes in despair and finally managed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." Kale didn't reply. He stood up coldly with our daughter and in his arms. "You two go ahead and enjoy the meal. The baby needs to be fed. I'll take my leave." With that, his assistant led him away. I watched from the window as he climbed into an expensive luxury car. Over the past while, I picked up plenty of luxury cars and high-end brand names from being with Ian. But when I saw Kale's car, I was sure I'd seen it somewhere before. I thought hard and finally remembered where. It was the day I first met Kale, back when I had just been transmigrated into the novel. I knew nothing about this strange world except that I transmigrated into a book. No system, no cheat codes. With no other options, I decided to just go with the flow and settle into this world as best I could. My first rule for survival was to stay away from anyone who might be a main character. If someone had a name that sounded too impressive, avoid them. If someone was too rich, avoid them. If someone looked too pitiful by the roadside, avoid them too. That was until I ran into trouble with a difficult customer while working a part-time job at a cafe and reception desk to help myself get by. In hindsight, his understated luxury car was already parked right outside the door. But I'd been completely clueless about brands. No one would have guessed that such an ordinary-looking black car was actually an Aston Martin. I asked him his name. He said, "Kale." Plain, ordinary name. I relaxed a little. He asked me, "They were harassing you. Why didn't you fight back?" I told him honestly, because they were wearing Nike and Adidas. They looked rich. I didn't dare mess with rich people. What could I say? I was trying to avoid rich people, but those were the only brands I actually recognized. Kale paused for a moment, then gave a flat, expressionless "oh." Without making a show of it, he quietly took off the watch he was wearing. I noticed the move and asked confusedly, "Why take it off?" He said, "It's a knockoff. Doesn't keep good time anymore. Don't feel like wearing it." I nodded with deep empathy because I, too, often ended up buying knockoff hair clips. At that point, I let my guard down completely. Someone who wore a fake watch couldn't be part of the main cast. But if I saw that watch now, I'd know in a second it was a Patek Philippe worth nearly $1 million. And the plain logo-free clothes he wore? Custom handmade haute couture. Later, as I got to know him better, I learned he worked as an ordinary office clerk. He was always pushed around by his boss and often had to work overtime and sit through endless meetings. Even that ordinary black car, he said, was borrowed from a friend. Unremarkable background. Ordinary name. Only an impossibly handsome face. But I didn't think much of it then. The world was full of good-looking guys. Not all could be main characters. And a struggling, overworked office drone? He didn't look like a main character at all. So, I started dating this completely ordinary but devastatingly handsome extra. He was thoughtful, gentle, and endlessly attentive. We spent 3 sweet years together. Then, when our daughter turned 1, I found out I had cancer. That was when the system finally appeared. It told me I was the villainous supporting female lead, and that the cancer was actually part of the book's setting for the role. The only way to cure it was to return to the main storyline. I was so angry I almost called it a heartless trafficker. The system added guiltily. Once you finish the mission, I'll send you back to your original world and give you $100 million. $100 million. My eyes went wide. Kale and I were just regular working folks. We'd never seen that kind of money. So, to cure my cancer and get the money, I left the father and daughter a goodbye note. Going for treatment. I'll come back when I'm better. After that, the system gave me a new identity, moved me to a new city, and I began fawning over the male lead. When I was gone for so long, Kale thought my treatment had failed and that I was dead. But now, by some terrible twist of fate, we'd met again. I was utterly devastated inside, terrified that the mission would fail because of this. Once Kale left, the tension at the table finally eased a little. By acting sweet and innocent, I made a good impression on Mr. and Mrs. Paulson. When the meal ended, they invited me straight to their home. Ian nodded and said, "I need to pick something up at home anyway. Come with me, Scarlett." I had no choice but to agree. But when we reached their estate, I found Kale was there too. He was blind, but the company couldn't run without him. His assistant had to brief him on everything. As Kale listened, he skillfully tied 2 little pigtails in our daughter's hair, and grew sleepy listening to the assistant's report and fussed to go outside. Kale let her go. The only problem was, she still couldn't walk properly. The servants helped her wobble along, but she absolutely refused to let them hold her. She finally made her way out and ran right into me. She looked up and stared at me curiously, just as before. Then she lost her balance and nearly fell. The servant hurried to catch her, frightened, and pushed her away and mumbled, "No, no." She struggled and was about to fall again. I stepped forward and held her without thinking, and went completely quiet. She seemed stunned. The servant apologized awkwardly. "Sorry, miss. The little one is shy around strangers. She only lets her father hold her." But the next second, and snuggled closer to me, grabbed my clothes with her small hands, and closed her eyes comfortably. Everyone froze for a moment. Ian laughed. "Scarlett, it's rare for my little niece to warm up to someone." I replied calmly, "Yeah, kids have always liked me." Ian didn't suspect anything, and went off to handle other things right away, and buried her face in my arms for a while, then lifted her head and stared at me with her big grape-like eyes. She kept looking at me, and I couldn't help feeling nervous. Could she recognize me? No way. She wasn't even 1 year old when I left. She wouldn't have any memory of me. But right after that, and pulled a tiny photo out of her pocket. I glanced over. It was a side profile shot of me holding, and Kale must have taken it secretly back then. Luckily, the lighting was dark and the picture was blurry. And looked at the photo, then at me, as if facing an impossible puzzle. But she was only just 2 years old, barely able to walk or talk. There was no way she could recognize the blurry face. Neither Kale nor I liked taking photos, so we had almost none. I asked her uneasily, "Have you seen any other photos?" And barely understood and shook her head, complaining, "Dad me not let me see." I breathed a sigh of relief. Thank goodness she hadn't seen more, or she really might have recognized me. Just then, footsteps came from behind us. Kale finished his work and came right out to find Anne. He was genuinely surprised when he heard, and in someone else's arms. "Are you letting the servants hold you now?" Before I could figure anything out, my bag spilled open during the tug-of-war. Everything inside fell to the floor. The bracelet tumbled out, and ran over, but her eyes caught on something else. She let out a soft, "Huh," and pointed at a little ugly kitten charm lying in the corner. An ugly kitten charm. Daddy has one too. My heart lurched. I stared at it quickly. That charm was something Kale and I had come across at a little stall during our early flirtatious days. One charm was a puppy, the other a kitten. They were so uniquely ugly that I bought them on the spot. I gave him the puppy one. I'd kept the kitten with me ever since, and picked it up and ran to Kale. "Daddy, look, it matches the puppy." I had been careless. Kale had an unnervingly sharp nose and a memory, like a steel trap. At this critical moment, I had no choice but to play dumb. I said with a perfectly straight face, "Maybe it's just the hair conditioner I bought for $2.99 online. Want the link?" Kale was speechless. He returned his blank expression and said coldly, "No, thanks." It made sense. Kale was a different man now. He probably wouldn't bother with cheap online products. When I got home, I scrolled through job listings as usual. Ian gave me a large sum of money every month, but I couldn't accept it. I knew full well that Ian had only agreed to date me because I copied the female lead's personality, that of a tough, innocent girl. He'd had a huge fight with his first love, the real female lead, and she'd left the country in anger. My mission was to imitate her and take her place as his girlfriend. So all this time, I'd rarely taken Ian's money and had kept my own job. I'd quit a few days earlier and desperately needed a new one. Just as I was thinking, a local job posting popped up. It was for a pediatric nutritionist. The description read, "Looking after a 2-year-old child, responsible for all daily meals. The child is an extremely picky eater. The applicant must be patient." I happened to have a nutritionist certificate. Seeing the high salary and generous benefits listed, I sent in my application right away. Back when I first decided to get that certification, it was because the system had told me to use cooking to win Ian over. I practiced my culinary skills so diligently that, in the end, I passed the nutritionist exam. 2 days later, I was invited for an interview. The interviewer asked many professional questions, and when I answered them all correctly, he finally nodded. He then gave me an address for the final interview. I marveled at how strict the process was and took a taxi there. When I reached the gated community, a guard personally led me inside. But as I followed the increasingly familiar route, I slowly sank into deep thought. This was the Paulson estate, wasn't it? Before I could finish thinking, the guard opened the door. I looked up and saw Kale and 2 servants inside the house. Kale and sat facing each other, clearly in the middle of a standoff. A servant held out a small bowl and coaxed gently, "Little miss, just one bite?" and slapped the bowl away and frowned. No, the bowl crashed to the floor, food spilling everywhere. Kale's face turned cold. "And Paulson, you'll go hungry if you don't eat." And wasn't scared at all. She was so upset that she spoke in full sentences. "Mommy's here. She doesn't yell at me." The servants all fell silent at her words. Kale's face went blank for a second at the word, "Mommy." Then he sneered. "Mommy doesn't want you." Anne's eyes widened and she shot back defiantly. "Mommy doesn't want you either. You're useless. Mommy's hurt in the hospital." Kale's eyes reddened as his own daughter talked back to him. His blank gaze trembled as he closed his eyes, sharp pain shooting through them again. But not a single tear fell. He had cried all his tears out the day he found that medical report. The argument between father and daughter ended as soon as I walked in. The butler recognized me and asked in surprise, "Miss Kingsley, what brings you here?" I never could have guessed the job posting was from Kale. I had wanted to stay far away from him to avoid giving myself away. But seeing the two of them bickering just now, and watching and puff up her cheeks, stubbornly refusing to eat, it was amusing, but it also made my heart soften with helplessness. In the end, I turned to the butler and said, "I'm here to apply for the nutritionist position," and turned to look at me. Her little face, which had been flushed with anger just a moment ago, went blank the moment she saw me. As I drew closer, she grew flustered. She quietly kicked the broken bowl under the table, as if she didn't want me to see it. I smiled and said, "Why were you upset just now?" and grabbed my sleeve and blamed her father. "Not upset. Daddy's upset. I'm not bad-tempered." Kale let out another cold laugh, but said nothing. When the butler learned I was applying, he said at once, "What perfect timing. The little miss hasn't eaten yet. Please come with me to the kitchen for a trial run first." I nodded and stood up to head to the kitchen, and stayed quiet and followed me like a little shadow. Before long, I finished cooking and brought the food out to feed Anne. Her eyes lit up after one bite, and she ended up eating a whole small bowl. The butler was clearly very satisfied with me, but still deferred to Kale for the final decision. Through it all, Kale listened quietly to our interaction. When I looked up, I caught him staring in my direction with a probing look. But I wasn't afraid of being recognized anymore, because back when I was with him, I didn't know how to cook at all. Kale had done all the cooking and cleaning. Now my cooking skills were nothing like they used to be. Sure enough, Kale dropped his probing gaze after a moment. He said coolly, "I'll leave Anne's meals in your hands from now on." And just like that, I started cooking for her, and every day. I got a high salary and got to spend more time with her. Kale took Anne almost everywhere he went. When he worked in his office, Anne sat beside him and played. Then one day, I brought ingredients to the estate and found Kale was unusually gone. Only Anne and the servants were there. I thought nothing of it, assuming he'd been called away on urgent business. But as I fed Anne, she asked me, "What's a marriage alliance?" I froze mid-spoon. "A marriage alliance?" And nodded. "Daddy's going to have one." For a moment, I was genuinely stunned. It made sense that Kale would remarry. He was the right age, had a child, and came from a wealthy family. I had my own transmigration mission to finish, and I couldn't be selfish enough to make him mourn me forever. Either way, a marriage alliance seemed only natural. I thought for a moment and explained, "It means Daddy's going to find a lady, and you'll all live together." And shook her head, nuzzling my cheek. "I don't want a lady. I want Scarlet." I sighed, and was about to say more when a woman's voice came from the doorway. "Really? You don't want a lady?" And I turned around at the same time. A glamorous woman stood in the doorway. She looked me over calmly, then took the bowl and spoon from my hands and smiled. "Are you Anne's nanny? We won't be needing you here anymore. I'll feed her." And looked like she was about to throw a tantrum, but then she remembered she shouldn't be bad-tempered, so she held it in. I watched her cheeks redden with frustration, frowned, and stepped in front of her. "I'm her nutritionist. Feeding her is my job." "Who are you?" The woman smiled. "I'm Alara Hale. I'm Kale's fiancé." Just as she finished speaking, Kale's voice came from behind her, sharp with warning. "Alara." She fell silent, then whispered to me, "Sorry, we haven't announced it yet. Please keep it a secret." With that, she handed the bowl back to me and stepped away. Not long after, Mr. and Mrs. Paulson arrived too. They sat in the living room nearby, apparently discussing the details of the marriage alliance. I finished feeding and played with her for a while, then prepared to leave. But as soon as I stood up, Alara returned to the dining room. "I left my bag here." I paid no mind, and kept gathering my things. I had just reached the front door when Alara suddenly called out, "Where's my bracelet?" "It's gone." I froze and turned around. The butler said, "The bag was here the whole time. The bracelet must have fallen somewhere." But no one could find it, even after searching everywhere. The only people in the dining room were and the nutritionist. Alara's gaze landed on me. One was the future mistress of the house, and the other was just a hired nutritionist. It was obvious who people would side with. She looked at me and said, "Miss Kingsley, have you seen my bracelet?" Her voice trembled as she spoke through tears. "That bracelet was a gift from my grandmother. Please, can I check your bag?" I glanced discreetly inside my bag. Sure enough, a glittering bracelet lay in the corner. Alara saw me hesitate and walked straight toward me, trying to grab my bag. I held on tight, scrambling to think of a way out. Kale's assistant reminded him awkwardly, "Mr. Paulson, it's not a servant. It's your brother's fiancé." Kale frowned almost imperceptibly and held out his hands to and, "Come to Dad." But Anne didn't go to him this time. She shook her head and snuggled even closer to me. She took a deep breath against my chest and mumbled, "Smells nice like." Kale looked at me with an empty expression. He scoffed inwardly. Nothing could smell better than his wife. His voice turned firmer. "And come here." Seeing that, I stood up sensibly and carried and over to him. As I handed her over, we stood very close. A strand of my hair brushed against Kale's face. When I set Anne in his arms and looked up, I found him frozen stiff. After a long moment, he spoke hoarsely, "Miss Kingsley, what perfume are you wearing? Why does it smell exactly like my wife's?" I forgot all about the bracelet in an instant. Kale, blind, could only take the charm and run his fingertips over it slowly. When he finished, his face darkened completely. "Miss Kingsley, where did you get this charm?" I cursed Alara inwardly and forced myself to use my old excuse. "It's $1.50 with free shipping online. Want the link?" The system despaired in my head. "That's such a lame excuse. Just give up, girl." Kale didn't say if he believed me. He pressed his lips together and stayed quiet. Alara spoke up again. "Miss Kingsley, why was my bracelet in your bag?" "I didn't take it. Check the security cameras if you don't believe me." The butler said awkwardly, "There are no cameras in the dining room." I frowned, just then, and spoke again. She pointed at Alara, then at my bag. She put it in. Alara panicked for a second, then composed herself. Kids say the darndest things. Why would I put my bracelet in her bag? And didn't back down. She held up the watch on her wrist. "Camera." I froze. "Your watch records video? You filmed it?" And nodded. "Daddy's phone can watch." She walked over, picked up Kale's phone, and asked him to unlock it. Kale silently complied. When they played the footage, everyone saw clearly Alara had slipped the bracelet into my bag. The truth was out. Alara's face went pale. I breathed a sigh of relief. Without, and I would have struggled for ages to prove my innocence. And blinked and looked at me, waiting for praise. I smiled, patted her head, and said sincerely, "Good job, sweetheart." I never saw Alara again after that day. Her deliberate attempt to frame me had likely come from thinking I was getting in the way of or perhaps something more. In the end, the incident only made Mr. and Mrs. Paulson rethink the marriage alliance. Meanwhile, when Ian heard what had happened, he sounded unusually pleased. "My parents must like you now," he said. "Come with me to the banquet tomorrow night." The system's voice immediately rang out in my head. "This is a major plot point. You must go." I nodded and agreed. It was the first time Ian had ever taken me out in public. The banquet hall was dazzling. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, casting soft golden light across the room. Elegant music drifted through the air as guests in formal attire moved gracefully between conversations. The moment Ian and I stepped inside, countless eyes turned toward us. A murmur spread through the crowd. "Is that Ian? Who's the woman beside him?" They looked close. Ian seemed completely unfazed. He simply lifted his arm slightly, signaling for me to take it. I hesitated for half a second, then slipped my hand into the crook of his arm. His lips curved faintly, amusement flickering in his eyes. When someone finally approached and asked directly, Ian answered without hesitation, "My fiancé." The words fell lightly, but they hit like a stone dropped into water. Ripples spread instantly through the crowd. Whispers erupted all around us. "Fiancé? Since when?" No announcement was made. I kept my expression calm, though inside, I couldn't help feeling a little strange. So this was how the stand-in was introduced. We stayed at the banquet until it was nearly over. Bored, I asked the system in my head, "So, what's the big plot today anyway?" The system practically vibrated with excitement. "Here it comes. The female lead is here." Almost immediately, a commotion broke out at the entrance. I turned instinctively. A woman stood in the doorway. She wore a trench coat, her hair slightly disheveled as if she had rushed over. Her eyes were fixed on Ian, unmoving, filled with emotion. For a long moment, she simply stood there. Then, in a trembling voice, she whispered, "Ian, I'm back." The entire hall fell silent. You could feel it, the shift. The story correcting itself. The female lead had returned, and I, the stand-in, was about to be written out. Ian slowly pulled his hand free from mine. My fingers curled slightly in the empty air. He stepped forward, his gaze locked on the woman as if nothing else in the world existed. The system's voice snapped sharply. "Quick. Act heartbroken. Try to stop him." "Oh, right." I forced my eyes to redden, quickly summoning tears. Grabbing Ian's sleeve, I called out softly, almost pleading, "Ian?" He stiffened for a brief second, but he still didn't look at me. The next moment, he walked straight past me and pulled the woman into his arms. It was as if he had finally found something he had lost. Something irreplaceable. In an instant, every gaze in the room shifted to me. Some were curious. Some were sympathetic. Some were outright mocking. I stood there, watching as Ian led the female lead upstairs without a second glance back. I wiped at my tears lightly and asked the system, "Do I keep crying?" "No." "Next step, go upstairs. Slip the male lead the drug." I paused. You're serious? Hurry. A few minutes later, I found myself sneaking upstairs. In my hand was the room card Ian had given me earlier. The hallway was quiet, lined with identical doors. A service cart stood nearby, filled with drinks and trays meant for the rooms. I slowed my steps, frowning slightly. Which room was his? Everything looked the same. The system urged impatiently. Hurry. Find the mail. Leeds room. I know. I glanced down at the card again, trying to recall what Ian had said earlier. But in my rush, my memory felt frustratingly blurred. It should be this one. Taking a breath, I slid the card into the slot. The door clicked open. The moment I stepped inside, I froze. It wasn't Ian. It was Kale. His shirt collar was messy and slightly undone. His breathing was uneven, and his eyes, though unfocused, were faintly red at the corners. A broken wine glass lay shattered on the floor. For a second, my mind went completely blank. Why was it Kale? Instinctively, I took a step back, reaching for the door. But before I could leave, a hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. Firm. Burning hot. The system screamed in my head. You mixed up the rooms? I was in a hurry. I panicked inwardly. They all looked the same. Before I could think of what to do next, Kale's hoarse voice sounded. Miss Kingsley? There was no turning back now. I forced my expression to stay calm. Yeah, I brought you the new meal plan. Kale didn't respond immediately. He was already drunk, and whatever the system had given me earlier had clearly affected him as well. The hand gripping my wrist tightened slightly, his body heat seeping into my skin. Then slowly, he stepped closer. Too close. Catching the faint scent on me, Kale's movements paused for a fraction of a second. Then, almost instinctively, he leaned in. My heart skipped. I looked up at him, at the man who had once been mine, and felt that familiar, dangerous flutter again. After all, I had fallen for him once, had lived with him, had even had a child with him. And now, I had already failed the system's task anyway. So what was the point of struggling? I exhaled softly, then leaned closer, my voice lowering into that same playful tone I used to use with him. Baby, are you feeling uncomfortable right now? Kale's unfocused gaze drifted slightly, as if he couldn't quite separate reality from memory. For a moment, he looked almost vulnerable, like someone who could be deceived, taken advantage of. I guided him gently to sit on the edge of the bed, then wrapped my arms around him. His body stiffened slightly at first, then slowly relaxed. Confused, disoriented, Kale seemed to fall deeper into the illusion, as if he had returned to the past, back to when everything was still intact, back to when I was still his. His fingers tightened suddenly against my arm. His voice dropped, rough and dangerous, low enough to send a chill down my spine. Scarlet. My breath hitched, but before I could react, his expression darkened, and in the next second, his grip turned forceful. Kale's jaw clenched as he growled through his teeth. Scarlet Kingsley, how dare you imitate my wife? I was stunned by his sudden move. The good news, my identity hadn't been exposed yet. The bad news, Kale now thought I was some schemer deliberately trying to get close to him. I explained awkwardly. I'm not imitating anyone. He sneered and tightened his grip on my neck. Not imitating? The same scent, the same likes and dislikes, even the same charm. Of all the copycats, Scarlet Kingsley, you're by far the most resourceful one. What if I was the real person? But I still had a sliver of the mission left to complete. I couldn't come clean to him yet. His grip grew tighter and tighter. The pressure hurt, so I slapped him across the face, just like I used to. Kale immediately let go and gasped sharply. I thought I'd hurt him and asked guiltily, did that hurt? But Kale seemed to have slipped back into a daze. Almost instinctively, he pressed his face back against my palm. The system was quiet for a long time, then said, obviously, you just turned him on with that slap. What? Kale's sense and desire warred within him. A second later, he slapped my hand away and snarled, go call a doctor. Now. The doctor arrived not long after that night. Once Kale sobered up, he scrubbed his mouth over and over in disgust. Rage boiled uncontrollably inside him. He felt dirty. How could he possibly join her in death with a tainted body? What if Scarlet looked down from the afterlife and was disgusted by him? He had turned down marriage alliance after marriage alliance. Why did women still keep throwing themselves at him? Kale fired me the very next day. No matter how much and threw a fit, he wouldn't change his mind, and cried herself out and was carried to bed by the servants. Alone in his study, Kale pulled out the photo hidden in his chest and traced it gently with his fingers. A sharp pain pricked at his eyes again. Moments later, Ian walked in with a stack of documents. Kale, sign these documents for me. Kale flipped the photo face down on the desk, calmed himself, and took the papers. After signing them, Ian gathered the loose sheets together. As he did, he accidentally knocked a small picture to the floor. Kale didn't notice. Ian didn't pay much attention either, and turned to leave with the documents. But the photo lay right at his feet. Out of the corner of his eye, Ian thought he saw a familiar face. He paused and looked down. It was a photograph. Huh? He bent down to pick it up. Only then did Kale notice the photo was gone. Before he could say anything, Ian asked in confusion, Kale, why do you have a photo of my girlfriend? Kale went completely silent. Ian stared at the bright, smiling girl in the picture. The more he looked, the more certain he became. After a long pause, Kale heard himself ask hoarsely, who is she? Ian answered matter-of-factly, Scarlet, of course. Honestly, my first love just came back, and I was planning to dump her. But she loves me so much. She cried so pitifully, I haven't figured out how to end things yet. Kale, why aren't you talking? Where did you even get this photo? After I was fired, I didn't look for a new job. I only had a little bit of my mission left to finish. So I acted heartbroken, too upset to work and desperate to hold on to Ian. I even showed off in front of the female lead from time to time. But that evening, just as I was about to go out and beg Ian to take me back, and showed up at my door, the child I hadn't seen in a while, a man stood beside her. Anne's eyes reddened the moment she saw me. She threw herself into my arms and mumbled through tears, "Scarlett missed you." The man said politely, "Miss Kingsley, I'm the new butler. The young lady insisted on seeing you. I hope we're not disturbing you." I quickly held in close and kissed her soft cheek. "It's okay. You're not disturbing me at all." After the butler left, I pinched her face gently. "You haven't had dinner yet, have you, sweetheart? Let me make you something." She followed me step by step and said sweetly, "I'm cooking with Scarlett." When we finished eating, I carried her to the sofa and watched cartoons with her, and grew tired from playing and slowly drifted off in my arms. I grabbed a blanket, wrapped her up, and held her securely. Half asleep, she grabbed my collar and mumbled, "Mommy, mommy." My heart softened. I kissed her again. Just then, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and saw Kale standing outside. Thinking about what had happened that night, I didn't dare say much and asked politely, "Did you come to pick him up?" But this time, he stood there without saying a word for a long moment. His gray, empty eyes stared straight at me, motionless. "Mr. Paulson?" Finally, Kale spoke, his voice rough. I turned to let him in, but he stayed where he was and said, "I can't see. Would you mind helping me in?" Something felt strange, but I still stepped forward and took his arm. But instead, he slowly placed his hand into mine, lacing our fingers together, and said calmly, "This is easier." His hand wrapped almost entirely around mine, his palm growing hotter by the second. I shifted uncomfortably, but he held on even tighter. I helped him sit on the sofa and asked casually, "Would you like some water?" To my surprise, he nodded. "Yes." The strange feeling in my chest grew stronger. He drank slowly and elegantly. I waited a long time for him to finish. Just then, thunder crashed outside. Rain began pouring down heavily. I checked the weather. There was going to be a storm all night. Kale heard the rain and asked calmly, "It's raining." I looked at the father and daughter in front of me, one blind, the other only 2 years old. I couldn't let them go out in the storm. After a moment of hesitation, I said, "Why don't you stay in the guest bedroom tonight?" For a split second, Kale's lips seemed to curve, so faintly I thought I'd imagined it. He nodded gently. "Thank you, Miss Kingsley. That would be a big help." That night, Kale and Anne slept in the guest bedroom. I lay in the master bedroom, counting down my mission. Only one final plot point remained. Once I completed it, everything would be over. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt something wrap around me, like vines, coiling around my wrists and waist. A cold, trembling breath brushed against my neck. I frowned and shrank deeper under the covers. Then my face was tilted upward. Those vines traced my features gently, from my brow to the tip of my nose, then along my cheeks. Finally, they paused at my lips. The touch lingered. It became harder to bear. My lips parted slightly, and in the next second, my breath was caught. Heat crashed over me, overwhelming, stealing everything. Kale's entire body burned. Pain pierced through his dry eyes, but this time, it came with a trembling, overwhelming joy. Scarlett, his Scarlett was alive. The realization nearly drove him mad. When I woke up the next morning, I touched my lips. They felt sore. A mosquito bite, maybe? After getting up, I found Kale and had already left. Breakfast was laid out neatly on the table. I didn't think much of it. I ate, then headed out. All I had to do now was complete the final task. Then I would finally leave the stage. Over the past few days, I had deliberately said many cruel things to the female lead. Today, I even threw myself down the stairs in front of her, and framed her for pushing me. Everything went exactly according to plan. I lay at the bottom of the stairs, clutching my bleeding knee. When the female lead played back my cruel words, everything should have ended. Ian should have lost patience. He should have dumped me, but he didn't. Instead, he looked at me, his brows furrowed. "I'll ask you one more time," he said slowly. "Did Imogen push you?" I nodded through my tears. He continued, "Do you have any proof?" Imogen spoke up immediately. "We can check the security cameras," but someone nearby whispered, "The owner of this club is too powerful. They might not release the footage." Both Imogen and Ian fell silent. Just then, footsteps sounded behind us. We all turned. The club's manager and staff were approaching respectfully, with Kale. My heart skipped a violent beat. I looked up in terror. I saw gloom gathering between his brows as he asked slowly, "Do you really love Ian that much?" Somehow, I recalled Ian's earlier warning to me. My sister-in-law passed away not long ago. My brother cried so hard, he went blind. This widower's completely unhinged now. Better stay out of his way. My blood ran cold. A chill ran down my spine as I broke out in a cold sweat and urgently called out in my mind, "System, help. Come deal with your big bad already." The system sighed. "Sorry, you're on your own now." Flustered, I forced a laugh and tried to play dumb. "Haha, what are you talking about, Mr. Paulson?" The system added quietly. "Oh, right. I canceled the voice blocking spell on Kale now that your mission is done." "What? System?" "That means he can hear your real voice now." My heart sank completely. "Later, Kale took me to the hospital to bandage my knee, then brought me back to his private penthouse. In the dimly lit room, I sank into the bedsheets and kicked the man in front of me in frustration. My knee's swollen. Are you that desperate?" As soon as I finished speaking, I remembered. He was blind. Kale reached out and felt around gently. My waist went weak, and I flopped right back down onto the bed. Kale twisted his fingers lightly and said in a low voice, "It's not swollen. Keep going." The next day, Anne switched to calling me Mommy. She opened her big eyes, looked at Kale seriously, and said, "Mommy cried last night. Don't hurt Mommy." Kale went silent. For a moment, something complicated flickered across his face. A few days later, the 100 million bonus arrived in my account. The system asked if I wanted to return to the real world. Seeing how torn I was, it finally sighed and said with resignation,
"Fine.
I'll give you a portal. You can travel between the two worlds anytime, and I'll grant you one more wish." Hearing that I could move freely between the real world and the novel world, I finally felt at ease. Then I thought of Kale's eyes. Without hesitation, I asked, "Can you cure Kale's blindness?" The system replied immediately, "Of course. Drink this sight-restoring potion, and it will take effect soon." Then it added softly, "Wish you happiness every day.
Goodbye."
And just like that, the system disappeared. Kale's eyesight began to recover gradually. At first, he could only make out blurry silhouettes. Taking advantage of his blindness, I dressed casually every day, completely at ease. Messy hair, loose nightgowns, even walking around barefoot sometimes. Kale said nothing, but more and more often, he would sit quietly, facing my direction as if watching me, until one day, he opened his eyes
and truly saw.
In his arms was the person he had longed for. Her collar was disheveled, her breathing soft, and even as she slept soundly, completely defenseless. Kale froze. Then slowly he blinked. The blurry outline sharpened. The world came back into focus. And at the center of it was her, Scarlet.
Alive. Real.
Within reach. Kale stared at her quietly for a long, long time, as if he could never get enough. His fingers trembled slightly as they hovered over her face, afraid that if he touched her, she might disappear like a dream. When Scarlet woke up, she stretched lazily and rolled over. The hem of her nightgown rode up to her waist. She didn't care at all. Still half asleep, she leaned forward and casually kissed Kale on the cheek. "Morning." Kale didn't respond. He just stared at her, completely stunned. Scarlet blinked, then frowned slightly. "Hey, why is your nose bleeding?" As soon as she spoke, she finally noticed. Those eyes.
Clear.
Focused.
Bright.
Looking straight at her. Her breath caught. She froze. Kale lowered his gaze slowly. His eyes traced every inch of her face, her bright eyes, the curve of her lips, even the tiny soft fuzz on her cheeks. Everything about her was painfully, overwhelmingly real. Scarlet's eyes widened. Then suddenly, she let out a happy cry. "Kale, you can finally see now." For a brief moment, Kale said nothing. Then very slowly, he reached out, cupped her face, and pulled her into his arms. This time, he wasn't relying on touch to imagine her. He could see her, every expression, Every movement, every breath, and this time, he would never let her go again.
Side story.
In truth, Ian had known all along that Scarlett had been secretly threatening Imogen. He had gone to Kale, utterly distressed, and poured out his troubles. Ugh, what am I going to do, Kale? Scarlett's been going too far, but she's just so in love with me. Kale's fingers tightened into a fist, but his expression remained calm. A conniving woman like that doesn't know the meaning of true love. Ian nodded, half understanding. What do you mean? Kale replied evenly. She lies to you today. Tomorrow, she could just as easily change her heart and go charm some other man. She might even abandon her own husband and child. Ian slammed his palm down on the table. You're absolutely right, Kale. So when Ian found out that Scarlett had not only framed Imogen but was also trying to trick him again, he immediately snapped. We're done, Scarlett. Sometime later, Ian stared at Scarlett and Kale walking hand in hand and fell into stunned silence. A wave of belated regret and anger washed over him. He ground his teeth and demanded, Kale, didn't you say she's a master of deception? Kale chuckled softly. If she only deceives me, then I'm more than happy to let her. He paused, then added calmly, Besides, unlike you, I was truly loved. Oh, right, Kale said as if remembering something. Make sure to come to our wedding next week.
If your random side character boyfriend turns out to be the final boss villain, your ex, your baby daddy, and your future husband, maybe the real problem isn't the plot, it's your life choices. Also, never trust a harmless extra. He might own the whole storyline. If a system gives you a mission, read the fine print. If a man goes blind crying for you, maybe don't fake your death. And most importantly, if he can recognize you by your shampoo, your cooking, and your toxic habits. Girl, you were never undercover. You were just delusional. Final takeaway. You can lie to the world, trick the male-led, fool the system. But you can never escape a man who remembers your $1.50 ugly cat keychain. Stay messy, stay dramatic, and always double-check which room you're entering.